Hello, friends. I'm back after some time in deep thought and argumentation to deliver a special video. Yes, I know at this point that's total BS. I'm just going to have to face facts. In truth, I am as low effort and low energy as a sloth, but a very sophisticated sloth. I want to give a warm welcome to some new subscribers and viewers from the Badger livestream. That was a good episode. It still amazes me, after all this time, that no matter how many people I talk to, I still find others who have learned these interesting philosophical ideas that address issues at the core of the human condition. You guys might not remember, considering how long ago it was now, but what I'm referring to is what Brian said in that episode about the three selves. That you have the authentic self in the center, the wounded self around that, and the protected self on the outside. That a lot of your pain, a lot of what you're reacting to, is not always other people. It's a reaction to your wounds, your insecurities, and what we do is shield our authentic selves out of our fears and resentments. I've been pondering that ever since, and even more so, I'm seeing it everywhere now. Just like the video I did on the problem with pain. I'm not the only one to see this problem. Lots of people have identified it and have given their own contribution trying to solve it. So thank you, Brian, for that valuable insight, and extended thanks to the individual who first proposed it. But I'm sure the reason why a lot of you are watching right now is because of this proposal that I posted on Twitter X. Yes, this is all planned out. I made this video before making the post, and now I'm here making like I did the video afterwards. It's a little bit like Inception, but I'm taking it to another level. Alright, let's get this episode started. Okay, so there's a couple of reasons why I made this proposal, and this video to go along with it. The reasons for the video are simple. I want to provide some explanation and supportive logic to the proposal. The reason for the document itself, put in simplest and obvious terms, is because it's important. Not just to me, but I think for all of us, and our future generations. I know lots of people have talked about human rights, enshrined laws, even established countries on constitutions, but I've not seen anything that accomplishes what I'm trying to do here. I did look this up before going ahead, and I found references to things like the UN Charter of Human Rights. Then you can look at things like the United States Constitution. However, as far as I can tell, none of them established a common basis for these rights, a common identifiably logical reason for why these rights are justified or ought to be upheld. It largely just seems to be because some people got together and agreed that these concepts were virtuous and they are to be applied by legal enforcement. Now that doesn't make them illegitimate, it just means that they either didn't identify the common factors that resonate with people to agree that these are appropriate for human rights, or they did, but didn't see it as necessary to concisely note down where they got their reasoning from. And granted, it's possible I haven't found it. But in either case, it could be because they couldn't concisely condense it down like what I'm doing now. They just had their accumulated knowledge and relied on the public and government to enforce them. In either case, again, there's two issues that I'm seeing. One is, without a common basis that is commonly known to the public, then it is just majority opinion backed up with an authority figure. So far that's worked in some ways, in others not so much. Secondly is focusing on the not so much part. As I'm sure most of you have noticed by now, especially my fellow human rights advocates, that there are gaps in contemporary society regarding abuses against human rights. Now, I know we live in remarkably developed times, but we're lacking in some areas. There's still some abuses against human rights taking place not just over the world, but in our own Western, so-called first world countries. And these abuses are serious. We can address them, but I think we need to adopt a common understanding, a set of principles to uphold. It's just not good enough to have these things enforced by the government. We, the people, need this common understanding. For without it, the government will sometimes neglect to protect us when we need it. Sometimes it may even become the abuser in question. In both cases, there's not really anyone proper to keep it in check. Okay, so I know you can all read, but we will go through this proposal. I'll just bring it up here. A proposal for a common basis of human rights. I've suggested this is life, autonomy, and bodily integrity. I propose that these are three natural fundamental rights, as they are what nature has given a life form in order to exist and maintain its existence. In this context, it is in regards to all human beings, regardless of their state of being, whether it be able or disabled, conscious or unconscious, developed or developing, whether they be male or female, of any ethnic or cultural background. Religious, government, ideological, or majority opinion should not take precedence over these rights. Now, I reckon that first clause there is fairly self-explanatory, but I'll expand why I said religion or any other ideology does not get to dictate what is and is not valid with human rights. It's not to delegitimize religion, it's a safeguard against authoritarianism. Think of it this way. If a religion or an ideology, like socialism for example, somehow was influential enough to have the lives of others in their hands, and say this was in power of government, would it be acceptable to you if that government decided to kill you, or a loved one, or take your property, using God or rule of the majority to justify such an infringement? I expect your answer would be no, even if you're religious or a socialist listening to me now. This is why the rule of the majority cannot be the justification for a moral system. The majority could decide a form of abuse is acceptable, and you would be powerless against it. You would not be able to hold them accountable, and they likely would not be able to hold themselves accountable because they were not taught a better method of moral practice other than majority rule. They would need an outside standard that they're taught to hold themselves to that is logically valid regardless of how many people are comfortable with a particular kind of abuse or infringement at the time. And yes, I know at the end of the day, my proposal will rely on the majority adopting it. However, that would not be these proposed human rights are valid because the majority says so. It will be because this is a standard of human rights that the majority agrees they should hold themselves to. From there, you can use it as a guideline to determine what is and is not appropriate in arguing for or against legally enforced rights. That includes entitlements and responsibilities, and what is and is not an appropriate infringement. In this way, I just explained the second clause. The third clause is somewhat self-explanatory, but I want to give an example. If everyone has a right to life, and it should not be violated without an appropriate reason, what would be an appropriate justified reason that is proportional or reasonably necessary, as I described? Well, one example I can think of is if you were in a situation where another person was currently attempting to violate your right to life. Now, sure, people could argue you should try to subdue the aggressor, but this is a threat to life that we're talking about. It's not really reasonable to expect the victim to bugger around trying to preserve the life of the criminal, currently trying to end theirs. Now, what about bodily integrity? To borrow from my old career as a phlebotomist, jabbing a needle into someone's arm to draw blood is technically infringing on their bodily integrity. However, it is done with the informed consent of their autonomy. That specifically being, with their knowledge of why they're getting the test done, and their desire to want it done is to improve their life integrity or bodily integrity or autonomy. And literally, blood tests can do all those things. You could have a condition that threatens your life, threatens your ability to move, or threatens other bodily functions or even basic comfort. Key point I said there is about their autonomy. The patient desires to have the blood test done. It's a service offered, not an obligation they have to fulfill. And every pathology collector, nurse, and doctor is taught the importance of respecting the patient's wishes. We call it the dignity of risk. That the individual has a right to decide what risks they want to take and what risks they don't. And you might be able to imagine the absolute scolding I could give so many people for the shitload of blatant hypocrisy that was put on display in the years following 2020. Yes, I haven't forgotten, and I'm still pissed off about that. But back on topic. The infringement of one's bodily integrity in this respect is appropriate and reasonably necessary because you have the individual's approval with full knowledge of why they're consenting to it, ultimately to improve their life, bodily integrity, and/or autonomy. On that note, let's move on to autonomy. And I want to use children as an example. And I do want to clarify that I know people might disagree that children have autonomy. I will address my reasoning later as to why they do. But let's continue for the time being on the premise that they do have autonomy. And I'd like to ask you, what do they like to do with this autonomy? They like to run around and make a mess of things. Now, what justifies infringing on their autonomy to stop them from doing whatever they like, that doesn't justify doing that to an adult? For most parents, this should be obvious, because the child does not have the life experience or knowledge to avoid getting hurt or making irreversible mistakes. You infringe on their autonomy to preserve their life and bodily integrity, and it's only a temporary infringement until they are able to do this preservation themselves. Temporary being, we usually agree around 18 or 21 years old, is considered old enough that it's expected they will have been taught or observed or had enough entry-level exposure to the world's challenges that they can now start to handle things for themselves. And these, of course, are all just examples. You can debate amongst yourselves different scenarios of how this would work. The key point is to preserve these three rights, and not to infringe on them without a justified reason. A justified reason needs to be weighed against how it affects the other rights, whether they be of that individual in question or others. Now, just a quick rundown of my definitions. In regards to life, I say animated matter because it's the most fundamental and common aspect I can see that demonstrates, to the best of our current knowledge, of what a living thing is. This may be about human rights, but whatever describes a human life must also describe the life of everything else we consider to be alive. Consistency is important. The animation being self-sustained is to mean it functions without any outside force's command or input. And yes, it may require the input of nutrients, but even if those nutrients were to stop being provided, the body will continue to attempt to function until it shuts down. And just because a person may not be conscious or capable of functioning without assistance, does not mean they don't have a life that needs to be respected. Bodily integrity, to be honest, I don't think that one needs further explanation or much further explanation. But if you guys could see anything significantly wrong with it, I will either address those concerns in another video or in the comments wherever I post the video. And now to clarify on autonomy. I know if you look up its definition, it might say something about independence. Now, I'm sorry, but I don't agree with that definition for two reasons. One, the concept of autonomy relies on a living thing having the ability to move. I do not see how you separate autonomy from having a will of your own to move your body. Secondly, I don't think there is really such a thing as independence. If you think about it, nobody is really totally independent as the definition implies. We're all dependent on someone for something. So I say it's just varying degrees of self-reliance. A child, for example, is self-reliant, but their ability to carry this out is very poor. An adult, on the other hand, usually has enough competence and resourcefulness to meet a high degree of self-reliance, which is not going to be the same standard for everyone. We're all in different life situations and are often made to survive our own way. And as a side note, it is okay to be dependent on others for some things, whether you're a woman or a man. Like I said, independence is not actually a real attainable goal. You can at best just attain a very high degree of self-reliance, which is good for you if you can, but not everyone will be able to meet the same standard. Alright, I think that is it. Run down the definitions. Regards to life. Yes. Bodily integrity. Yes, I said that one. And autonomy. Yeah. I am going to leave that in. I don't care if it's something that should be jump cutted. It's staying in. Alright. So, you have my proposal. I do want this to be shared with anyone you think would be interested. Ideally, I want intellectuals or human rights advocates to look this over, only because I expect such people would understand the importance of having consistent principles and that this is something desperately needed in society. Now, I want to clarify, I'm not making this proposal to replace any current human rights laws. I'm trying to offer a consistent standard that we as individuals in society can hold ourselves to. A standard that's easy to understand and reference. Unlike the current human rights laws that require access to a library or a website and read large texts and maybe have to put up with some academic language to understand. This is also important because I think a lot of our conflicts and disagreements come from not holding ourselves to a consistent standard of behavior towards others' rights and interests. Yes, we want people to respect our rights, but do you respect others? Maybe you assume you do. After all, few people could say out loud that they actually intend others' harm. But then I must ask, what was your position on vaccine mandates? Against what others should or should not be allowed to do with their own lives? Or even with your own life? What's your position on abortion? What's your position on women's rights? And how is that contrasted by your position on men's rights? Do you have reasonable or consistent principles when they're actually tested? And by all means, hold me to this standard that I'm proposing. It's not that I think I'm totally right and that this can't be used against me. I hope it can be. It's just that I have enough faith in what I've created here that it might possibly be the right way to look at things, even if it shows me that I still have some work to do in refining my own principles. So I think I'll be ending the video there. In closing, someone whose opinions I hold in high regard said something that resonated with me once. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to paraphrase a little bit, but what I understood they said was, we need to learn to love again. To love thy neighbour. This, I think, is how we do that. By agreeing thy neighbour has rights and interests they're perfectly justified pursuing and defending. Alright, that's it. Let me know what you think. I'm looking forward to your comments. And on that note, as I said, I would like this to be shared around. So all of you watching, you are free to use this video for response content, either in a response format video of your own or just via Twitter. Is fine by me. And yeah, like I said, looking forward to seeing what you guys have to say. And I still haven't figured out how I should best end these videos. I guess I'll just say see you later, and see you in the next video. Ciao, Auf Wiedersehen, sayonara, all that jazz, blah blah blah. Ending video.